It's time to set the Wonder Year. Ah, heck. Wait, no. Wrong show. Crossovers are confusing.
It's time for part 2 of this podcast crossover special right here on Setting the Record Queer, a podcast where queer people talk about the pursuits and communities they love. This is episode 10, and it's about variety podcasting. My name's Alexis, my pronouns are it, and she, her, and I'm one of your hosts.
My name's Kaylee, my pronouns are she, her, and I am your other host.
Hey, Kaylee.
Hi. Hey, Alexis. I have done nothing since Smash came out but play Smash.
This is accurate. I was also excited for Smash. I basically haven't played it, other than when I've been doing 1v1s with Kaylee. She's better than me at Smash, but like, it's okay. I don't mind. I actually don't mind.
It's really fun. They did a lot with the single player. It's probably the most stuff they've done with the single player, with the exception of Brawl, which had like the whole Subspace Emissary.
Brawl is the best Smash game. Wow, we're about to lose. We're about to lose hundreds of listeners, and I don't even care.
We only have hundreds of listeners.
You're about to lose podcast guests for that take. Bye.
You heard me. Super Smash Bros. Brawl is the best Smash game because it has a cool story mode. This is something I genuinely believe. Do not at me. Unless you want to, feel free. I'm always looking for attention.
Yeah, I've been surprised. The character I've enjoyed playing the most is actually Mii Gunner, which, I kind of expected, like in Smash 4, those characters would be not very fun to play as. But I've been surprised. I really enjoy the Mii Gunner.
And unsurprisingly, I've been maining Mega Man. In fact, the only character I've actually played as is Mega Man. Like I said, I haven't had much time to play the game because Kaylee's been playing it almost exclusively. I still need to try Simon Belmont and Inkling and all of the good characters that I love, but Mega Man, He's actually better in this game than he was in Smash 4, and I'm pretty happy about that. Okay, what else has been going on in our lives? Oh, we had a fun time at our local speedrun gaming group, Speedruns Rochester. We did a gift exchange, and it was a pretty great time. One thing that was really, really cool about it was everyone got something really good. Like normally when you do like a group gift exchange, you end up with people getting like, here's a Target gift card because I don't know anything about you. But literally everyone got something they actually wanted. Kaylee is holding up her gift right now. Kaylee, would you like to describe it?
It's a tiny Rowlet plushie, and it's really cute and really small.
It's very good. The tiny Rowlet is excellent. And so I actually had quite a fun time receiving my gift because the person who got me, they got me the Mega Man 11 Prima guidebook, which is really awesome, and I was really happy about, except for the fact that I already owned it. They found this out from my Twitter before the gift exchange, so they were like, okay, no big deal, I'll keep the Prima guidebook and get Alexis something else, and then they got me a Magnemite plushie, and we're just like, okay, fine, I give up, but hey, now I have 2 Magnemite plushies, and I'm a very, very happy girl.
I mean, it just goes to show you, like, how well he was able to shop for you.
Yeah, like I said, everyone in Speedruns Rochester did a real good job. I was super impressed.
So the last thing we're going to talk about before we roll into our guest organization is just real quick. I've been learning Game Maker Studio and making some small little games that I've been having fun with. I'm enjoying it a lot. And yeah, I lied. I've been doing that in addition to playing Smash.
How dare you? How dare you?
Oh, we did do one other thing. Alexis and I were both on this other podcast called the Wonder Yeerks.
Yeah, that was a good time.
We were strapped down against our will and forced to watch an episode of Animorphs, which neither of us had ever seen or read one of the books before. In fact, I think our only exposure to them were some of the bad video games.
Yeah. Except, like, only ever hearing of the video games. Like, Animorphs games get into GDQ a lot because they're just kind of like a cult favorite. I never actually watched any of the runs. I just saw that they were on the schedule, and that was my exposure to Animorphs. But yeah, if you haven't listened to the Setting the Record Queer crossover episode of the Wonder Yeerks, you should go do that. And speaking of the fact that this is a crossover episode, so we were on the Wonder Yeerks, and by the laws of alchemy and fair exchange, or I don't know, something over dramatic, we have someone pretty cool here. Hi, someone pretty cool.
Hi. So speaking as someone who's currently rewatching Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood with her girlfriend, it's equivalent exchange, just to make, not to be a pedant or anything, but that is sort of my whole shtick. But hi, I'm Sara. My pronouns are she, her.
Hey, Sara.
Hi, what's up?
You know, we have a cool girl on our podcast, and I'm really excited about it. So, Sara, why don't you give us a quick rundown of all of the things that you do?
So what I do primarily, I mean, in terms of podcasting at least, I host and help run 3 different podcasts. I host and sometimes edit Fearbaiting, which was my first podcast that lasted. But if you want to go way back in the annals, you can actually find episodes of the show that I made before I realized I was a girl that were called One Star Cinema. And it was just about bad movies. Like every third podcast out there is about bad movies. And both times the podcast died. I tried this experiment twice. Both times the podcast died within 3 weeks of us doing an episode on The Secret of Nim 2. It's a cursed film for podcasts. It's terrible.
So if we ever want to get out of the podcasting life,
just do an episode about The Secret of Nim 2.
Hi, welcome to Setting the Record Queer. This episode is interviewing The Secret of Nim 2, famous queer movie.
Just splice an audio quote. Just splice an audio from that movie.
Oh my god, that would be incredible. But also, I kind of like this podcast, so I don't want it to end.
But then in 2016, my friend Blair and I started Fearbaiting, which was a sort of a project because I was someone who had been terrified of horror movies my entire life. Like I hadn't watched, excluding the time that I watched like The Thing and Cabin in the Woods in college, I didn't watch any horror movies. And Blair, on the other hand, he is an absolute like huge fan of horror movies. And so we did this as a bit of a project as like him as the wizened horror guru and me as the neophyte in training about horror movies because I had just taken a class on them in my final semester at college. So I was really into them. One night I had texted him about it, and then a week later he was like, hey, so when do you want to do this podcast? I was like, I'd kind of forgotten about that entire discussion, but hey, let's freaking do it. And so then we started doing Fearbaiting, and I'm now like a horror movie buff. Like I love them. They're like my favorite genre of movie now. Oops. It's one of my favorite things. And the point of it, obviously, if you can't tell from the name, which is a play on the word of queer baiting, it's a movie, it's watching these horror movies, because every movie podcast that I listen to, and I don't listen to a ton, but everyone that I have listened to is just all cishet white men, and I wanted to throw some wrenches into that mix with some diversity in the podcast. So we're looking at it from, I mean, we don't come at it from the smartest point of view, but we do come at it from the gayest point of view that I am aware of in movie podcasts.
I mean, honestly, good.
It's an absolute blast to do. I've gotten to experience some of what are now my favorite movies thanks to the podcast. Movies like Scream, which I'd never seen. I got to rewatch The Thing, which I'm always happy about. Coherence is another one that I remember really, really loving. And it's just been an absolute blast. And then when we launched our Patreon for Fearbaiting, we also made an incentive, because one episode I went on a really long tangent about Animorphs because I loved those books as a kid. And we had joked about making maybe an Animorphs podcast in the future. And so as part of our Patreon incentive, $20 a month, that covered our hosting fees for an Animorphs podcast. So we got to $20 a month pretty quickly because of some very generous donors. And so we were just like, well, I guess we have to do Animorphs now. So that started the Wonder Yeerks, which is our Animorphs rereading and eventual rewatching, and sometimes rewatching before the rereading is done podcast. It started with just me and Blair again, but earlier back in January of this year, Blair had to just stop all podcasting because he was entering his final semester of school. Just wanted to make sure that he did it as good as possible. That kind of left me on my own. I reached out to our mutual friend Sara, who is a phenomenal musician. I'm going to plug their work here. You can check out, they make music under the handle People You Meet Outside of Bars. They're on Spotify right now, and also you can check out their music at, and this is my favorite URL ever, gaygothvibes.online.
Oh my god, that's incredible.
But so Blair and I had gotten about 10 or 12 books into the Animorphs series when he had to go away, and I didn't really want to keep reading the books in his absence, so Seda and I swapped over to watching the television show, and that proved that show isn't even that bad. It's just like extremely Canadian live-action 90s television. So make of that what you will. And now Seda, Blair, and I we're all doing that podcast. And then last year, in December, because I was like, I don't have enough podcasts happening right now. Let's do another one. Like a bunch of my friends and I had been kicking around this idea of like a politics podcast because we like yelled about politics a lot in our other Discord server for another podcast that I'm going to plug called Post Game of Thrones, where two of my friends watch Game of Thrones and just talk about how bad of a television show that it is. But we all kind of met through that. Some of us knew each other from other places, but like I didn't know any of these people very well until I met them through the Discord server for Post Game of Thrones and their JoJo's Bizarre Adventure podcast, Yada Yada Boys, and their music podcast, Fun Point, all of which are great. Sorry about all the plugs, but we all met each other. And at some point during 2017, I don't even remember who said it, but we always just loved making fun of Hillary Clinton's Pokemon Go to the polls joke. And so someone at one point just said, Henry Kissinger is Pokemon going to die. And we had been like kicking around the idea of a politics podcast. One day I just decided, you know what? I'm tired of beating around the bush. I made the server. I brought everyone in who'd expressed interest. And I was like, we are recording an episode in 2 days. Who wants to be on the first one? And now we have 13 hosts to yell about politics every week, except for weeks like this when we're all too busy with holiday things. That's a lot of long stories. Thank you for, sorry.
Yeah, no, you're good. You just answered like the next 3 of our questions, but
I'm your host. I'm your other host, and I'm your other host, and I'm your other host, and I'm your. When does the episode start? 20 minutes from now. I'm assuming you don't use our format.
No.
Probably not.
The format we use on HKIP it's my personal favorite because it's always, hi, my name is X, aka some politically relevant like portmanteau or nickname, and we have a channel in our server where we can where people are allowed to like hop in and post names that they would like hosts to read, and I would like to read a couple of those names just off the.
Oh, please do.
Okay, so Carly Rae the Jetsons, Nintendo Taylor Swift, Feeling Twewy 2,
Mood.
This most recent one, Chuck Schumer Palahniuk.
I don't actually get that one.
Chuck Schumer, the politician, and Chuck Palahniuk, the guy who wrote Fight Club.
Ah.
Okay, and this one, which is really tickling my ivories right now, Gnarly Gray Gypsum. But yeah, and then the other possibly is just, hi, my name is Sara.
Okay, well, you already covered a lot of this, but are there any other details you'd like to fill in kind of your history with podcasting? Like, what sort of made you start in the first place?
I mean, the first podcast I'm not going to mention the first podcast I ever listened to because they were bad people. But the first podcast I started listening to after that was the They Might Be Giants podcast, which is where they would just kind of like do dial-a-song-ish stuff and just like little sketches and stuff from like upcoming albums. And it was kind of promotional. And that was why I didn't even know what a podcast was when I saw that. I was just like, oh, let me look up They Might Be Giants on iTunes, just tickety-tappity on the keyboard. And I saw They Might Be Giants, Why Does the Sun Shine? 99 cents. They Might Be Giants. Episode 15, free. And I'm like, ooh, free They Might Be Giants. I don't know what YouTube is yet. Let's listen to that. And then after that, the first big one that I really got into was My Brother and Me. I have listened to those first 100 odd episodes probably about 6 or 7 times because I would just get bored and like I had no other podcasts to listen to. So I would just be like, okay, let's just listen to all of My Brother and Me because I didn't really have friends in high school. So I was just kind of listening to podcasts nonstop and just like every time there was a new episode, I would listen to it, and then I would just, all right, let's start back at episode 1 and just listen to them all. And it would take me like 2 or 3 weeks to get through all of it. And I would become enlightened for those brief moments, but I was unable to maintain it. But I think one of the podcasts that My Brother and Me wasn't really, like, one of the first podcasts that I remember, like, also really falling in love with, and this is one that I like to credit very highly, is April Richardson's Go Bayside, which is definitely probably not the first like rewatch podcast that you're seeing a lot of lately, but it is one of the best ones in my opinion. It was April Richardson having a comedian on every week to talk about the wacky and wild adventures of the 6 teenagers at Bayside High School in Saved by the Bell. That show is extremely a lot, and that podcast was great. There were some great guests on those shows, like Graham Clark was on an episode. Paul F. Tompkins was on like 3, and they're all incredible episodes. That podcast has long since ended because they finished their run back in like 2015, I think.
Paul F. Tompkins is on so many podcasts that I wouldn't be surprised if he just showed up on one of our episodes and we're like, Paul, what are you doing here? You're not queer. Go away. And he's just like, it's a podcast. I'm contractually obligated to be here.
Yeah.
I love him, by the way.
Yeah, Paul F. Tompkins is great. Every episode, every like podcast he's been a guest on, like I think it's their best episode. But I listen to podcasts like all the time right now. Like I have like 15-ish shows that I listen to every week, pretty much, and a couple other ones that are bi-weekly. And I'm this close to being caught up on my backlog, and then next week Giant Bomb is doing their Game of the Year podcast, so I'm just going to be sent back to the Stone Ages as far as being up on my backlogs go.
Stop giving people plugs to our competitors.
But another thing that's been important to me is that Henry Kissinger is Pokemon Go. All of my podcasts, actually, they all exist on the Noise Space network, which I think, setting the record clear, is also like a friend of noisespace.xyz.
Yeah, we're pals with them.
I'm legally required to say XYZ because it is owned by a Canadian.
I mean, good.
Yeah.
Hot take. We here on this podcast are big Zed fans, or at least I am. I don't know how. Kaylee, how do you feel about this?
Well, my feelings, I think, can be summed up as not at all.
I respect that. But noisespace.xyz is a website owned by a longtime friend of mine, Matt Ribeiro. He's one of the hosts on Henry Kissinger. He's done a bunch of other podcasts, and he's a radio DJ up in Toronto. Absolute great guy. Noisespace.xyz for all your podcast needs.
So I don't think it would be an understatement to say that podcasts are a huge part of, or maybe just your life.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Podcasts are a huge part of my life. I record at least 2 hours of podcasts a week, and I consume far more. I listen to podcasts when I'm doing pretty much everything.
So with all of the different podcasts you do, you completely different subjects, completely different formats, different sets of hosts. In your experience with recording and preparing and producing these podcasts, what's different about all these podcasts? But what's the same?
I think the same is that, like, I was going to say with few exceptions, but there's no exceptions. Everyone sort of comes to the table understanding what's going to be going on here. Like everyone kind of comes. I mean, of course, there are evenings when people have less energy than others, and that happens. That's certainly happened to me on plenty of nights. And I have carried people. I've carried low energy people as many times, if not more. I have been carried as a low energy person as many times, if not more, than I have carried low energy podcasts. But everyone is always just willing to step up and do what they're either willing to step in and say, hey, are you okay? We need to postpone this episode? Or they're willing to step up and say, I will tow this thing to the finish line. And that's always really good. I always love seeing that. Like, I've definitely been in moments where I get to like the last 45 minutes of a podcast and I absolutely just tank. I'm out of all of my juice. And I get pretty much all I have left in me is my social media plugs at the end of it. And like someone else will sense that and just be like, all right, I got you, and just carry me to the end. The stuff that's different is sort of the chemistry that I have with a lot of my co-hosts. Like, I've known Blair for definitely the longest out of anyone that I do a podcast with. I've known Blair for like 5-6 years now. And the energy that we have is so much different than the energy that I have with anyone else that I do a podcast with. And I don't say that it's like better or worse, but it's definitely a weirder energy, I think, than I have with any of my other podcast hosts, because the tangents that Fearbaiting goes down, like we've been podcasting with each other for so much that we kind of just like, we kind of just know, like it's almost an instinctive like trust fall sort of scenario that's like, I am trusting you that you are not going down a rabbit hole that's not going to lead nowhere here. And so to be fair, Blair sometimes misplaces that trust in me a little bit, because I do sometimes take us down rabbit holes that go nowhere, but I edit those out. The other thing that's different is just kind of timing. Like, it's obviously a different show. You know, Fearbaiting is almost always a one-on-one show. Wonder Yeerks is a 3-person show, and Henry Kissinger can go between 2 and 5 co-hosts. So just trying to, not because we're not all in the same room as each other, it's obviously very easy to like snowplow each other's conversations, and knowing when and how to interject and like knowing when to rein yourself in is. I feel like that can change from. That doesn't even answer the question. Where the hell was I going with that one?
I think it does.
You know?
Yeah. I mean, if it doesn't, it's still interesting and relevant podcast information.
Yeah.
And by podcast information, I mean relevant information for our podcast, as well as relevant information about podcasting. This episode is weirdly meta, but you know what? We're rolling with it. So one thing I wanted to kind of get in a little deeper on was you mentioned sort of developing chemistry with different kinds of podcast hosts. And I know chemistry, as a podcast host and also as a podcast listener is something that really only just kind of develops over time naturally. But do you have any like thoughts or tips on how one can go about doing that sort of thing? Asking for a friend who isn't me.
So the best way that I've ever heard like podcast chemistry like described is from an episode of a podcast that I don't really listen to much anymore. Not because I thought it like got bad or anything, just because like it's about magic. It's about playing limited Magic, like Magic the Gathering Draft and Sealed, and I don't play that very much right now. But it's limited resources. It's a great podcast. Marshall Sutcliffe and Louis Scott Vargas, they're great guys. They know a ton about the game. But Marshall Sutcliffe, because Marshall Sutcliffe is the mainstay of that podcast, but every couple of years a host leaves. There's been like 5 co-hosts in the other slot beside Marshall. And every time he has to go on like a hunt for a new co-host. And what he always looks for is someone who knows when to drop in. Because there will always be some overtalk, but there is someone who will the best part of the ultimate goal of chemistry is to get on someone who will never let you linger unintentionally. And I think that anybody can get to that level of chemistry pretty much, barring rare exceptions. But like the ultimate goal of chemistry is to just be able to know when someone is going to come to a conclusion and when to pick up and keep moving from them. Just like you need to be able to handle the baton pass like as elegantly as possible. And it's a work in progress. There are some episodes of Fearbaiting where you just like you will hear me just completely fumble the baton pass from Blair because my brain just completely farts out on. That will happen sometimes. But in my eyes, that's kind of what the best chemistry is. The baton pass. You got to be able to catch it when the next person is ready to hand it off to you. Because otherwise, you're not going to come in first in the relay race. You're going to come in like 4th, and then you're not going to get to go to the Invitational or the Nationals or anything. And you're just going to go to college for engineering, and you're going to get a decently paying job, but you're just going to spend all your time at your desk thinking about what could have been if you hadn't dropped the baton.
Are you projecting a little by any chance?
I was never a runner. I've been watching an anime about it lately.
As someone who ran track extremely poorly in college, I get your metaphor. I can't keenly relate to it because I wasn't good at track and I dropped out of engineering anyways. Maybe those two things were related, I don't know. But I understood your metaphor.
To wrap back around to the question, I guess, like, I think chemistry is something that, like, it's going to take time no matter what to build up to, especially on podcasts. Like, we have an aid here of the fact that we are on video, but I don't really do that with any of my other podcasts. So it's all based on audio cues, and that takes a while to learn. You're going to learn it quicker with some people than others, but really just time and doing it a bunch, that is what gets you to chemistry. You're not going to have great chemistry probably. If it's your first time doing a podcast with someone, you're not going to have great chemistry your first episode. You're probably not going to have great chemistry doing it your second episode. But like as you go on, you will refine your craft, you will hone things, and this chemistry will develop. If it is truly a podcast that you are passionate about and you want to keep doing, you will develop that chemistry. That's about it. That's all I got.
Oh no, the baton, no!
I was waiting for you to ask the next question.
See, I think our chemistry was great because we both knew to be silent to allow for that baton pass joke.
Totally intentional.
Totally intentional.
Anyways, Kaylee, please ask a question. Oh God, this is horrifying.
Oh yeah, and also, in order to fix any baton drops, just make liberal use of editing.
That's what our secret is. So, what sort of podcasting community is there as a whole?
There are bajillions of podcast community. When it comes to things like, you don't really see as much of a network building, or like pretty much every large podcast I think has a community. Like even a smaller podcast like Henry Kissinger, Is Pokemon Going to Die? I mean, I say smaller, but it's like it gets like 4 or 5 times as many listeners as the Wonder Yeerks or Fearbaiting does. Like we clock at like 700-800 listeners for each episode, which is a lot, and we have a pretty sizable Discord community. But like I feel like there's very rarely communities based around like whole like sub podcasts, if that, or like podcast like spheres, if that makes any sense. Like people will make communities for podcasts, but not for like groups of podcasts. Like how there's like a subreddit for horror movies, for example, but there's not like a subreddit for like bad movie podcasts or whatever. Like you'll see these communities like the big ones that come to mind. These aren't podcasts that these aren't podcasts that I necessarily listen to, but they are podcasts that I am aware of have large communities. Pretty much the only exception to this being the McElroy family of products, those who kind of conglomerate into their weird own hive mind. But like pretty much every podcast has a subreddit. If you've heard of the podcast, it probably has a subreddit.
Not this one. We have a Discord server.
I don't think we have a subreddit, but carry on.
I mean, Discord is starting to become a more popular place for podcast communities for that reason, because it's so much easier to interact with the hosts, in my opinion. Because like Henry Kissinger's Pokemon Going to Die has a subreddit. I go there maybe once a month to see if anyone's posted anything interesting there, and that's it. I don't do any interaction there, and nor does pretty much any of the other hosts, except to post episodes. And actually, now that I think about it, I'm pretty sure that there's someone else who's not one of the hosts who actually posts the episodes just when they go live. Thank you very much, Bisexual Punch Party, for all of your service. Bisexual Punch Party is a Reddit user who is not on the podcast, but created the subreddit and posts every single episode to the subreddit every time. But like these communities kind of spring up, and you can kind of sort of build your own. Like there's a general McElroy community on Facebook, for example, but there's also, I'm aware of, like a smaller McElroy fandom on Facebook that is just like queer McElroy fandom listeners. And like with a big enough community, these smaller sub-communities will carve themselves out a space, and they will still exist as a part of the whole, but they will also have their own separate space. With smaller communities like the Henry Kissinger one, for example, there isn't really like enough of a community to necessarily carve out a smaller space, and plus so many of the hosts of Henry Kissinger are queer, so like, I mean, at least on that front, there's no need to really carve out those spaces to steer away from heteronormativity, because we are pretty far from heteronormativity on our own. Cis heteronormativity, rather.
Yeah. So one thing I'm kind of curious, and you've sort of hinted at, the like kind of queer community around podcasting. One thing I've noticed, in kind of the general rise of podcasting over the last however many years with, the McElroys and the Night Vales and all of that stuff that has become super popular, it's always been extremely queer, which, is kind of why this podcast called Setting the Record Queer exists. So do you have any thoughts on that matter?
Honestly, it's a weird anomaly that I can't really put together myself. Like post Game of Thrones, Brooks and Eddie, as far as I know, at least, I would not ascribe their sexualities, but as far as I know, as far as they have disclosed, they are both cisgender heterosexual men, and the community they like less than 5% of their active Discord community is also within that like subsection. Almost every single person in that community who's active at least is like some form of not that. And it's just weird that these queer spaces just like sort of pop up in podcasts. And I'm not entirely sure why this happens. I've been unable to put a finger on it. It's kind of mystified me, but I also know that pretty much every trans person I know has a podcast. So maybe it's something to do with
Feeling
that.
a little called out, not gonna lie. Lie.
I'm calling myself out on that too. I have 3 podcasts. But like I think it just, if I had to just shoot from the hip on this, I think that podcasting is a very good way to get someone's voice heard, to get your voice out there, to make yourself known. And if you do not have a podcast yourself, I think the best way to do that is by living vicariously through someone who is doing a podcast. To live vicariously, like the McElroy brothers sending in their, with their audience questions and being able to send in those Yahoo answers. Going back to post Game of Thrones, they always take listener questions at the end of the show. It's sort of being able to live vicariously through and have your part in a podcast without actually being on the podcast yourself, and also sometimes in being on another podcast yourself.
So, what if, say, just hypothetically, you're having a great time expressing your queerness, living vicariously through other podcasts, or maybe you're not queer and you like asking questions, podcast. What if you're not satisfied with that? What if you want to get into your own podcast? as someone who's done this quite a number of times, and in fact, someone who helped us start setting the record queer,
That is true.
These now several, however many months ago, what are your big tips for how you can get started in podcasting?
The biggest tip, and this is a tip that you will hear from everyone, and I'm sorry to repeat it, but it's a true tip, have something to talk about. So many podcasts out there are just a couple of friends getting together to have some fun and goof around on a microphone. Listen, I'm sure you're funny, but nobody wants to listen to that. There's a lot of podcasts out there. There's a lot of good podcasts out there. And if people are going to spend time during their day to listen to your show, they are not going to want to listen to you just pal around with your friends with no real driving. Whatever it is, it doesn't really matter as long as you have a theme and you're not just going in with the intent of just like joking around for an hour. Does not really matter what the topic is, but just find a topic and have it. That is the best advice that I can give. Also, just freaking do the podcast. Like, you can just do a podcast. Like, find some obscure television show or like just find some passion project that you want to talk about a lot. Watch a bunch of movies, talk about politics, do whatever you want. Just get a couple of friends together, go out, and I normally wouldn't give this advice, but if you're just starting a podcast, you can just go out and buy like a $60 USB mic, and you can just go from there. Eventually, I start for a year and a half of Fearbaiting. I was on a $60 USB mic. With Lexi's help, I was able to upgrade to a nice XLR microphone. But there is no shame in using a USB mic in the meantime. And also, pro tip on that: if you don't have a plosive screen, a sock works wonderfully.
As an audio engineer, I second that statement.
But don't put the sock on while you're recording.
God, no. Please, God, no. Do you have any more tips, particularly about like the technical stuff? Like, okay, I've got a phone, I've got a couple friends, I have a really genius idea that's going to revolutionize the podcast world. What do I do next? We recorded something. Where does it go?
So the technical, first of all, the technical aspect. The best way that I can recommend do it if you're doing a remote recording, record locally in Audacity. Do not rely on any online recording software. There is online recording software. I used to usually just hesitantly record a Skype call. Absolute worst way to do it. You're going to get terrible audio quality. You're going to get drops, and if anything goes wrong with the Skype call, you're done. You lose an episode. Record locally. There's a free program called Audacity. Pretty much every podcast, like even the McElroy brothers, last I checked, are still using Audacity for their. They might actually have been able to shell out for something like something in the Adobe suite recently, what with all the money that they have from their massive podcast empire. But still, Audacity is a perfectly functional and very, very useful product that you can get for free. Record in that.
As an audio engineer who uses like Pro Tools and all of the fancy equipment, Audacity's great. It's freaking great. It's awesome. Use Audacity.
And as somebody who knows almost nothing about audio, in fact, I know nothing about audio, I edit this podcast, the one you're listening to right now. It's like easy to use too. Anyway, this podcast was brought to you by Audacity.
Yep. Audacity really is a great product. Also, insider tip, if you are editing a podcast in Audacity, go ahead and just every audio file that you have loaded in, make sure that you do these two things to it. You need to run compressor and run equalization. Just run those two things and they will make your life easier. You can also run noise reduction, though depending on the quality of your microphone, that may just make someone's voice sound really tinny, so your mileage may vary with noise reduction. So just keep an eye out for that one. But compressor and equalizer are lifesavers. You don't need to really change anything. You can get in there if you really know what you're doing, but honestly, if you just use the default settings that they have on the presets, you're in your good graces.
Podcasts without compressors make me so angry.
I was doing that for a while.
It's so easy to just make your podcast listenable, and then people don't.
But when you're editing it together, so you've heard of a sync clap. Every podcast I've been on, actually pretty much every podcast I've been on does it differently. The best way to do it is just go to have everyone on your podcast go to time.is, start recording. Well, the easiest way, at least. I don't know how to say the best way because it's not the way that you two do it, but it is possibly the easiest way. Open up time.is, just say, okay, as soon as the second hand, it hits 40 seconds, we're all going to clap when we're recording. You can sync up to that clap, delete everything before it, and hey, you have all of your audio tracks synced up. Trying to think of anything else. Cut any silence that is not necessary. The less silence, the less dead air that you have on your podcast, the better. Again, the baton toss thing, or the baton pass thing. This is not color guard. This is just running. Well, would color guard do a baton toss?
I mean, as a known drum and bugle corps enthusiast, Heck yeah. And they'd do like 5 or 6 flips through the air with it, and it would be totally radical, and they'd toss them like 30 feet and catch them no problem.
Oh yeah, I've seen. I was also in march. I was also a marching band person for 4 years. I only ever saw sabers, rifles, and flags. Never a baton.
It depends on the show. I think I said this in episode 0 actually, but now that we have a bunch more listeners, if you are queer and in a marching band, please, dear God, I want you on this show. Oh my gosh. I am a huge marching band geek.
That'd be really cool.
Anyways, I think the final bit of technical advice I'd like to hear from you is, okay, I synchronized my podcast. I edited my podcast. Where does it go?
So if you're not like me and you don't have a friend who has a website where he will gladly host your podcast for free, you can go to libsyn.com and just sign up for a hosting thing there. For like $15 a month, you can get like 200, I'm so bad with file sizes. I think it's 200 megs? Tell me if that's something too much.
I want to say
it
was 250 megabytes. And for some context, the episodes of Setting the Record Queer, like an hour long, are like 50. So...
Actually, I believe it is 200 because we used to have issues when we would do 5 episodes, when we would have 5 episode months on Fearbaiting. But for just like $5, you can just have them archive the oldest episode and just you get to put the new one up. But free tip there. But Libsyn, you pay $15 a month. They charge on the first of the month. They do not charge, and they do not charge 1 month from you first buying. They charge when you buy it, and they charge a month, and then they charge on the first of the month after that. So whatever you do, don't sign up for Libsyn on the 31st. I mean, if you got $15 to burn, like go for it. But like you should probably just wait a day.
I think they give you a free month as well. But use the free month on a full month. It might have been a promotion.
Yeah, we got like the first month of this podcast for free. We use Libsyn.
I mean, to be fair, it gave us the $5 a month plan, which only let us upload 1 episode a month because it's not very much hosting space. So we'd upgrade, but
yeah,
I mean, like that was another thing. Like we could just upgrade real easily. Not to be the guest on my own podcast. One hot tip: don't try to do too much. As someone with major executive dysfunction problems and a tendency to massively overwork myself in like 15 different things, do what's reasonable.
Yep. I'm also going to give a couple other advice. This is advice you'll actually hear a lot for webcomics specifically, but this also applies to podcasting. Done is better than perfect. So getting your first episode out there is better than having the best first episode you could possibly have. And also give yourself a decent buffer. I'm not saying make episodes far in advance, but like if you can record like a day or two before the episode is supposed to go live, like do that. It's always way better to do. I mean, more in advance if you can, but
it takes us a week to edit these things.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Depending on how heavily you edit. Like Henry Kissinger, for example, that's just like someone tanking down for like 3 or 4 hours and just slamming out an edit because those are almost always recorded on Thursdays and going up on Fridays. Fearbaiting is Saturday, Sunday recordings and Monday releases, and the Wonder Yeerks is whenever we can recordings and Friday releases. So depending on the level of editing, and like I said, done is better than perfect. But yeah, I think that's the ins and outs of my advice.
That was good advice. So, final question. So normally here we would ask something along the lines of like, what's coming up for you? You know, what like your projects, but like you are a podcaster. You have a schedule of all of the things you do. So when do your episodes release?
My episodes release, okay. So these things are a little bit varied because we normally try and get ahead of a time. We normally try and get ahead of ourselves on time and have them released on a standard time. Not always the case though, and that's just kind of how things happen. But for the most part, Fearbaiting comes out on Mondays at 11. The Wonder Yeerks comes out every other Friday around like noonish. And Henry Kissinger's Pokemon Going to Die comes out every Friday around whenever it's edited. But pretty much always a Friday afternoon upload. But yeah.
Okay, well, I think in that case, it's time to move on to our next segment, the Performance Showcase. Now we're going to play a little sample for you of the podcast the episode of the Wonder Yeerks that we were on. If you haven't listened to it yet, once you're done with this episode, you should absolutely go over there. It was a great time. We had a lot of fun.
It was so much fun.
For context about the episode, it was basically Animorphs, It's a Wonderful Life.
Which is appropriate for the season.
Yeah.
Does this episode still air in December?
No, January 1st.
Okay. It's appropriate for the season that just ended.
I still don't know anything about Animorphs. And as you're going to see in this podcast segment, I didn't know anything about Animorphs going in, so admittedly this outcome isn't surprising. Anyways, enjoy.
But so, what do you two know anything about Animorphs?
I know
Like,
they
give me-
turn into
I want
animals.
what I want right now is a comprehensive listicle of all of the top 10 things you know about Animorphs.
Okay, so number 1,
Okay,
they
we'll take
morph
turns. We'll take
into
turns.
animals.
Yes. Okay. That's a good
All right.
number 1.
All right, Kaylee, your go.
Number 2, there is a PlayStation 2 game that is bad, but is still better than it has any right to be. And
Oh,
it's
Animorphs
confusing.
Shattered Realities. When will we get an HD remaster of you? Crash Bandicoot, Spyro the Dragon, Animorphs Shattered Realities.
All right, come on, we gotta get top 10.
All
Alexis,
right,
3.
number 3, there's also a bunch of other Animorphs games, and they're actually bad.
Number 4,
Number 4.
Animorphs starts with the letter A.
So that's not where we're dropping out. Lexi, do you have anything else to add besides letters in the name of Animorphs?
Number 5, I know there's a lot of books.
54 plus bonuses, 54
I-
numbered books, and then about 12 extras.
I
Number
said that
si-
like there was going to be more, but there isn't, so Kaylee, go.
Number 6, Johnny in the video game To the Moon references Animorphs on a few occasions.
Okay.
Number 6, you just did number 6. I'm on
number 7.
Number 7, the covers of Animorphs books sure are a thing.
They are in fact a thing. Those books, you know what? I can't disagree. Those books do have covers. Number 8.
Number 8, Animorphs is filmed in Canada.
Okay, yep, I told you that one.
Yeah, but you didn't say it on the podcast.
True. 9.
Number 9, the Animorphs books were adapted into a TV show. Got him.
All right, Kaylee, bring it home.
Number 10, the last letter Animorphs is S.
Wait, what are all the letters in between?
I don't know. You know, I just thought of an 11th thing I know about Animorphs much later.
What's an 11th thing that you know about Animorphs?
Animorphs, the second letter in Animorphs is an N.
Look how much we learned from being on the Wonder Yeerks. So
Okay, if that's your first episode of listening to the Wonder Yeerks, I implore you to go back and listen from the start, because I think Animorphs should have gotten the recognition that Harry Potter did get, because I don't think Harry Potter is fine. Animorphs is genuinely good. Even when we're not talking about, like, even not from a young lit perspective, like, it's genuinely good. K.A. Applegate is a phenomenal world builder. She has phenomenal, incredible characterization. It's definitely time-stamped a little bit because there's a lot of cultural references, but it's time-stamped in the same way that Buffy the Vampire Slayer is, where it's like, oh yeah, I kind of remember that a little bit, or like, I've heard references to that my entire life. It sets up the characters perfectly. I love every single bit of it, and it's dark as hell. In the first book, I think I made this clear in the episode, but in the first book, one of the main characters says to the other one, "Do not let them take me alive." Like, this is about the depravities and the horrors of war, and also about an alien who turns into a human sometimes in order to eat cinnamon buns because he likes the taste too much and he does not have a mouth in his alien form.
watching an episode of Animorphs with literally no context I enjoyed Miss Sarah's wild ride. I will say that
I
much.
want to get off Miss Sarah's wild ride. I want to get off Miss... So I'll be honest about the episode.
There's no getting off.
I'll be honest about the episode. I precisely understood none of it. I had no idea what was going on, start to finish. And we discussed, we got a nice summary from you in the episode. And I still don't know what an Animorphs is. But I did just figure out that the third letter was I.
All right. Would you like a brief synopsis of what Animorphs be? Of what Animorphs is?
I think if they want to hear a synopsis of Animorphs, they should listen to the Wonder Yeerks, because we did talk about it there.
Yeah, Sarah, where can people listen to this wonderful crossover episode we just did along with the rest of the Wonder Yeerks?
I mean, that's just going to be on the Wonder Yeerks' RSS feed. It's in iTunes, it's in Google Play, anywhere you can get a podcast. I don't know if we're on Stitcher. So sorry if you use Stitcher and you cannot find the Wonder Yeerks on there. Let me know. I'll see what I can do.
Yeah, so definitely go listen to that podcast.
You're on Stitcher.
Oh, hey, there you
Yay!
go. So you feel free to go listen to it on Stitcher. You can also listen to Setting the Record Queer on Stitcher. And now I'm going to sit here and tell you about all the things you can get with Stitcher Premium just now.
Which is nothing related to this podcast.
Anyways, why don't we move on over to questions from our listeners? So here on this podcast, Setting the Record Queer, we take questions from you, our listeners, to give to our guests or ourselves, the hosts. If you have questions for us or our guests, you can ask them on our Twitter at STRQueercast, via email at settingtherecordqueer@gmail.com, or via Discord. Our Discord can be found at bit.ly/STRQcord. So we had one pretty good question this week from Violet Moon in Discord, who asked, what's the hardest part about starting a new podcast? How do you go about promoting yourself when first starting out?
I think the hardest part about starting a new podcast is the third episode. The third episode is always the hardest part of starting a new podcast for me. The first episode, you've got all the energy. You're like, yeah, let's go. We're starting a new project. Second episode, you still got kind of that. Third episode is where a little bit of the this is an every week thing or this is an every other week thing may start to set in just a little bit. I just feel like there's a little bit of fatigue, and I felt that with all three of my podcasts. I love doing all of them, but the third episode was just a little bit of a push to get through. But once you're at the fourth episode, you're golden. You cannot be stopped except by the secret to the rescue. And promoting your podcast, that's kind of hard to do. I mean, if you can afford to pay for like ad space elsewhere, you can go ahead and do that, but that's expensive. Really the best thing you can do is just talk about it a lot on your pre-existing social medias. I post about all my podcasts on Twitter a ton. I used to post on them on Tumblr when I was still using Tumblr. But just word of mouth is always really the best way to spread those kind of podcasts. Just kind of telling your friends about it. Like if you got a friend who you know would be interested in the podcast that you are making, let them know, have them spread it to their friends. Word of mouth, I mean, they always say it on podcasts, but word of mouth is genuinely the best way to sort of spread awareness for this kind of stuff. Because honestly, you hear someone do an ad on a podcast that someone got paid to read, and you're going to be like, oh, I don't want to listen to that. Probably. Sometimes you want to listen to it, but most of the time.
I've listened to a couple podcasts off of hearing ads and being like, I hate advertising fundamentally, but this is super my thing, so I guess it works. But word of mouth is good. Talk about this podcast. Wink, wink. Nudge, nudge.
Tell your friends.
Can I ask a question of you two? Because I don't think this topic is going to come up otherwise, and I really want to talk about it.
Go ahead.
At gunpoint, you are forced to make a rewatch podcast of some variety. What show are you choosing to rewatch? I have an answer for this, and it's way more in-depth than either of yours is going to be, and that's completely fine, because I've thought about it a lot.
You stole my segment.
We'll entertain this usurpment of our podcast, you usurper.
Harumph!
Well, I have one to give you time to prepare, because I've had this one.
I'm harumphing at you.
Oh, I'm very sorry. I'm very sorry, Kaylee.
As you can see, Kaylee is both angry and rich right now.
Harumph that's an in-joke between the two of us. Harumph is the official noise of a disapproving rich person. Harumph.
It's the grunt of the bourgeois. My rewatch podcast is a little bit involved. So my rewatch podcast is called the Friday Night Deathmatch. Now, this relies on the prior knowledge of two concepts, just from the title alone. Are you familiar with Celebrity Deathmatch?
But I can figure it out from the title.
Okay. It was a kind of a bad show that just pitted animated caricatures of celebrities in the wrestling ring against each other. Are you aware of the Friday Night Death Slot?
Nope.
Okay. The Friday Night Death Slot is where where the four major networks, ABC, NBC, CBS, and Fox, put shows that they do not expect to do well. It is their death slot because who is going to be sitting at home on a Friday night at 8 p.m. watching primetime television? I'll tell you who, not enough people to bother keeping the show on. So many television shows have lived and died explicitly within the Friday Night Death Slot. What Friday Night Death Match would be a composite rewatch of every television show that started and finished in the Friday Night Death Slot, being from Friday night at either 8, 9, or 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and pitting them against each other. Each episode would be an episode, and there would be a whole bracket about everything. Do you remember the television show Moonlight, starring Alex O'Loughlin as a vampire? You don't. Do you remember the show The X List, about the girl who has a black book of every boy she's ever dated, and then so a psychic tells her that she has already dated the man, her true love? You don't. Nobody does. I do. Because I had no friends in high school, so I was the one watching these shows on Friday night. Friday Night Deathmatch has just a plethora of options at your fingertips. And I would just, once the Wonder Yeerks is over, I am genuinely, seriously going to give this podcast some more consideration.
See, I was going to go with something similar. I was going to pick every show that's been on every Comedy Central exclusive that ran for exactly one season. The only one I can remember by name is Krogman-Dune and okay, I can only remember half the name.
What would you call it?
Comedy Decentral.
Not bad. I like that.
No, that's pretty bad.
I've heard worse.
Anyway, Alexis, what's your pick for the rewatch? Because I'm gonna wait. Can I guess your pick before you try it? Because I know what it's gonna be.
Go ahead. You will be wrong.
Are you sure? Because I'm going with the old Mega Man cartoon.
You were wrong because I hadn't thought of one. That's a great idea, though. Yeah, I'm doing a rewatch of Ruby Spears Mega Man, which leaves me at a relatively limited episode pool, but hey, that's fine.
Some podcasts are designed to have an end.
So it would most definitely be called Now I've Got Your Power.
Yeah, that's a really good name for it.
Not you patriotic doofus.
Oh, that would also be, ha, I knew you'd.
There's a clip in that show where Mega Man like takes a bullet for the statue of President Lincoln because he's so patriotic.
Ha! I knew you'd risk yourself for President Lincoln. Okay, fun fact about that scene from that episode of the Ruby Spears Mega Man cartoon. I watched that clip while standing on the Lincoln Memorial. Because I am a dedicated, known Ruby Spears Mega Man fan. Anyways, speaking of strange questions that are sort of like personality tests, hey, Kaylee, why don't you take us into Kaylee's question of the week for this week?
Yes, well, if we're all done infringing on inferior knockoffs to my brand...
I thought my question was good, but I digress.
Your question was good, but I have a business to maintain here.
Sure.
The Kaylee's question of the week enterprise literally funds the state of New Jersey, where I do not live.
Good to know.
Anyway, you have been given the Animorph power source thing, which is what I think it's actually called.
The Escafil device.
No, the Animorph source power thing.
If you call, I'm not going to answer this question unless you call it the Escafil device.
I guess that's all for this episode of Setting the Record Queer.
I'm kidding. Go on.
All right, the escargot device.
I'll take it.
You're given an escargot device.
Sure.
And you can animorph into any non-animal.
So
that could be a person, that could be an inanimate object, that could be like some fantasy creature.
Is this a one-way thing? Is this like a Nothlit situation? Like once I morph, I'm that? Or can
What's
I just,
a Nothlit?
Nothlit is,
you know what? Don't tell me.
Nothlit is when you're trapped in the morph. If you stay in a morph for more than 2 hours, you are trapped in there permanently. You cannot demorph.
No, you can demorph. You have the ability to animorph into one of these things. And yes, animorph is a verb.
It is. We use it like a verb on the podcast.
Okay, great.
I mean, you really messed up, I think, by opening the door to fantasy creatures there. Because, I mean, you know that I have to pick a dragon on this one.
Okay, they have to be like half human fantasy creatures, though. You can be a centaur, you can't be a dragon.
Oh, can I be a... I've beaten you at your own game. I've beaten you at your own game. I'm a Tabaxi. Tabaxi.
What is a Tabaxi?
The cat person race from Dungeons and Dragons.
She dabbed.
I did dab.
And she's not welcome back on the podcast.
That's fair.
I would like to be a Transformer.
I respect that.
To break to kind of break the meta a bit. That way I get to be a giant robot and a car. Best answer. Yeah, that's fair. You can't be, I was guessing you could animorph into Turbo Teen, but that wouldn't really work. You can't be a giant robot if you're Turbo Teen. That would just be a human and a car. Like, I'm talking a giant robot and a car. Boom, I win.
So, like, if you animorphed into Turbo Teen, like, Turbo Teen's like a boy. So, like, that would be a whole thing you'd have to do. You'd have to deal with just to be a car.
Yeah, why wouldn't I just animorph into a car at that point?
Yeah, honestly.
This seems like a complicated way to anamorph into a car.
Is that your final answer? Car?
No, it's Transformer.
Well, hey, there you go. Okay, thank you two for like discussing that, because in that time frame, as I was able to finally come up with a good answer for this one. I want to be a Rob, as in like the Nintendo Entertainment System add-on. I am ready to match the form of my husband TaskBot so that I can truly be with him forever.
What a useless Animorph.
And also only ever play Gyromite and Stack Up again.
Oh boy, I can't wait to play oh no, I don't have a Rob to play Gyromite with. I guess the second player will, oh, never mind. Because you can just play those games with the second player instead, but...
Well, I mean, you're not stuck as Rob. You can Animorph out to play other video games. As long as you don't play video games as Rob for more than 2 hours, because then you're a Noplet.
I mean, Gyromite and Stack'em are like hot 5-minute games, so I'm not too worried about that.
To human you, but the thing is, when you Animorph a new creature, their instincts take over. Maybe Rob's instincts are just to play Gyromite forever. You don't know what your instincts will do when you are Gyromite, or when you are Rob.
All right, you know what? I'm going to cut it off there. I am going to leave this podcast on that thought right there. That is all this week for Setting the Record Queer. Sarah, thank you so much for coming on and doing this crossover special shenanigans with us. Also, hey, everyone listening to this podcast, Happy New Year. It's 2019. We survived 2018. That's all I'm going to say on that subject.
Wait, hold on. Before we go into this, just a quick reminder to people listening to this. We will be at AGDQ. We will be doing a live episode of Setting the Record Queer there on Friday at 3:30 p.m. If you are attending GDQ, it'll be a great episode. We have Brosentia, who does Kuso Grande, Seraph, and Ariel, who both work on Power Up with Pride. It's going to be awesome. If you can't make it to GDQ, that's okay. There will be a recording. We also will try to maybe get the audio up on the channel. No promises there. But if we don't, the video will be up on GDQ's YouTube page at some point afterwards. There will not be a normal episode that week because we will be at GDQ. We won't have time to record and make one.
We'll be playing video games. Screw you guys, honestly.
But we will put something in the podcast feed. So keep an eye on it. We will release something on the day that we would normally release an episode. But don't expect a full episode with a guest.
We're gonna do something fun. Yeah, we're gonna do something fun here around GDQ on the 11th. Come by, watch us make bad puns at Brosentia, ask some questions maybe. Anyways, also answer Kaylee's question of the week. Answer Kaylee's question of the week, and we'll feature our favorite answer in the next full episode as always.
Kaylee, I genuinely cannot believe you asked me the question. You cannot more Animorph into an animal, but you can Animorph into your persona.
No, that doesn't count.
I made it count because I can Animorph into a Tabaxi. So you didn't stop me from saying that answer, so I can Animorph into my persona.
Where can people find you, Sarah?
I can be found on Twitter at SunhatZhenya, and I know that's a weird thing, so I'm going to spell it out. That's SunhatZhenya. I can also be found on Twitch, where I've been trying to stream a little bit more lately. You can watch me speedrun Mega Man and Cuphead and eventually Tony Hawk's American Wasteland. And that's this. My Twitch name is the exact same as my Twitter name, SunhatZhenya, SunhatZhenya. As I mentioned previously, all of my podcasts, Fearbaiting, the Wonder Yeerks, and Henry Kissinger's Pokemon Going to Die can all be found on noisespace.xyz. And because I didn't get a chance to plug them earlier, I'm going to go ahead and plug to the network that I think was actually possibly the most influential in me getting into actually doing podcasts myself, which was the Audio Entropy Network, specifically Molly and Ashley, who do the incredible podcast of Totally Reprised, which is rewatching all of Totally Spies, which is a nightmare hellscape of a show.
I'm just going to go ahead and make an assumption that we're going to need to put a viewer discretion as advised on that one too.
Oh, yeah.
So be warned, that will not be safe for work if I know anything about Totally Spies.
Pretty much every podcast I have named on this show, just discretion advised on all of them. But yeah, that's my stuff.
Cool. Yeah, thank you so much for coming on. Be sure, everyone, to go listen to the Setting the Record Queer Wonder Yeerks crossover, like as opposed to the Wonder Yeerks Setting the Record Queer crossover, the one you're listening to right now. Obviously, the order of the names is super significant and definitely has an object meaning. Go listen to that time we were on the Wonder Yeerks. It was a great time. We talked about all sorts of things that may or may not have included Animorphs. Given how little Kaylee and I seem to know about Animorphs now, I'm not really sure. Anyways, if you enjoyed this podcast, as opposed to the podcast that this podcast was on, with the host of another podcast, you can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/settingtherecordqueer. Patrons can get early guest reveals, access to a special patrons-only Discord channel, high quality or early episode releases, and special thanks on the show. If you liked this podcast, some of the best things you can do to help us continue to grow are to leave a review, tell a friend, or talk about us on your particular social media platform. You can find us on Twitter at STRQueercast. You can also find us via email at settingtherecordqueer@gmail.com, and come hang out in our community Discord with us hosts, a bunch of our listeners, and even some of our super cool guests who have decided to grace us with their presence. And that's at bit.ly/STRQcord. While you're at any of those contact addresses, feel free to hit us up with ideas for who or what could be on the show, or maybe you think you'd be a good fit for the show. Feel free to let us know. We're always looking for more ideas. The logo for the show was drawn by Cubotic. That's QBTIC on Twitter, or Cobot, QOBOT.tumblr.com. The theme music for the show was done by Thrill Me Music. You can find more information about her work at thrillmemusic.squarespace.com. This podcast was edited by Kaylee and produced by yours truly, Alexis. Kaylee, where can our listeners find you?
You can find me at Twitter at witcheshex, that's WITCH Hex, or you can find me on Twitch at the same name, but with an underscore between witches and hex.
And you can find me on Twitter and Instagram as Princess Proto, Twitch and YouTube proto.ml, Twitch proto.ml, and Twitch and YouTube as Proto Magical Girl. Thank you so much for listening to Setting the Record Queer. Our favorite answer to last week's Kaylee's question of the week, which was, if you could add one Mario Kart style power-up to Roller Derby, what would it be? Came from Violet Moon in Discord, and it was a block that enables hug mode, where racers can gain extra points by hugging their opponents. How sweet. Thank you so much for listening to Setting the Record Queer, and we will see you 2 Tuesdays from now. Bye-bye.
Bye.